Hey there, everybody. Welcome here to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So here we are, Sunday night, and Ben is back in the saddle after a month's hiatus. A little more than a month now, I think, but like 6 weeks or so. Doing Ben's album challenge, an episode that I've grown to love to do. I know he likes to give me the albums. He also likes me to pick my favorite song off the album. And basically what I do here is I kind of review the album. It's a listen through. I don't give a lot of stats or anything on it. Just listen to the album, give my kind of review of the songs I hear on it, which one I like the best. And he's given me some absolutely killer albums off this. A couple groups that he gave me, I first heard from him. He was the first one to introduce me to these bands, and now they've become amongst my favorite bands. Probably the most notable one in there is IQ. He gave me the Wake album fairly early on in our Ben's album challenge. That band is probably in my top 50 bands now, skyrocketing to success. Very difficult to break my top 30 anyways, but because some of those bands are so established. But IQ, definitely one of my favorite bands that he introduced me to. Today we're doing an album. You know, the first Ben's album challenge we did, he gave me the debut album of this band called Journey, and it was very different than what I had heard Journey about, and I didn't mind it. There was one particular track on it I actually quite liked. This album is their second album. So we're starting again with another Journey album, as he pointed out to me when he sent me the info. And the album is called Look Into the Future from 1976. So their second album. To my knowledge, I don't think there was any personnel change in the album. I don't think there was. I think that it was basically the same personnel, but some of the sound has changed, starting to change more towards what they eventually would become. So the things about this album I really liked, having listened to the entire album. I found the instrumentation on this album is very strong like their first album. Maybe not as much, well, I shouldn't say that. The instrumentation is just as strong as their first album. They just don't do as much prog music on this album as they did on that first one. So you don't see as much of this phenomenal guitar playing and absolutely killer drums and keyboards. And even the bass. Sorry, I got hiccups now. Anyways, I found this album to be a little bit of a different sound to it. There's some more mainstream poppy stuff on this than there was on the first album. There is some hard rock stuff as well, and a little bit of prog, but not as much prog as there was on the first album. So they're it's kind of a transitionary album. You can feel that they've not given up on the prog, but they've kind of moved from the prog a bit to more of a center stage mainstream stuff. Not as much, but definitely a move that way. You can see it. I don't find this album as memorable as the first one, but then again, the first one I really didn't care for when I first heard it either, and it grew on me. Maybe this one will be the same. That first album, I own it now. I play it on occasion sometimes. I do like that one particular track quite a bit. There's none of that on this album. That big track that they had on the first album, which I can't remember the name right now of the track, that is. There's nothing outstanding on here, but there's quite a bit of good stuff on this album. Also, I found on this album, as I did on the first one, maybe a little bit more on this album than the first one, or maybe I just notice it more. I just found the vocals are a bit flat, a little bit unimaginative. Maybe tame might be a better word to use. Maybe I didn't notice it as much on the first album because it was my first experience with them, and I was listening to the prog stuff more than I was actually paying too much attention to the vocals, but I noticed it more on this album. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of a blow by blow Not too much of a blow-by-blow, but a little bit of a blow-by-blow on the tracks on the album. So I believe there are, let me get my glasses on so I can make sure of this. I think there's 8 tracks on this album. I think the first album had roughly the same, seven I think maybe was the amount there. Anyways, you've got the opening track is called On a Saturday Night. This is kind of a straightforward rocker. The piano gives it a little, there's a little bit of piano on this, gives it that a little bit more of that poppy feel to it than I really think it is. I think it's more of a rocker, not so poppy of a song, but that piano does bring that element to it. And again, the vocals, like I said earlier about the entire album, the vocals very tame, I found. But maybe they suit the album because it's not as bombastic an album as the first one. But I just found that a stronger vocalist at this point might have really brought some of this stuff up a little bit more. The next track is All Too Much. Another poppy mainstream number, maybe a little more poppy and mainstream than the opening track. The vocals again are a bit tame. I kind of, to me, it's kind of a it's a bit of a forgettable type of track. There's nothing really stands out here to make me wanna. I think I'd probably have to listen to this maybe a half dozen times for me to kind of really remember a lot about it. And it's a bit of a slow and subdued song as well. The next track out is Anyway. Picks up a little steam after it starts out a little slow and subdued, but then it picks up some steam, and the riff and the keyboard parts are kind of a bit of an eerie feel to it. Yeah, definitely a little bit of a creepy feel, I think. Well, maybe not creepy is not a good word. The eerie sound, I think, is a little bit better. It has a little bit more of a raw sound than the first 2 tracks too, so it's a little bit not as doesn't feel like it's been synthesized as much. And the vocals are a little bit better on this track than they are on the first 2 as well. The guitars are melodic, but they're strong. There's slow, melodic, strong guitars on this particular track. The next track out, which is She Makes Me Feel Alright. This is the track I like the best on the album. I'm not really sure why I like it the best. I think it's because the guitar sound is heavier, much heavier guitar sound. Some really catchy riffs, and the guitar solo is killer on this track. Absolutely killer. The vocals are also a bit stronger. I'm not sure why that is. I think maybe because there's not as much keyboards on this track, and so it gives this feeling like the vocals are a little bit more predominant. That could be the case. I'm not really sure. But definitely my favorite track. Easily my favorite track on the album. The next track up is You're On Your Own. Another melodic keyboard opening. This is kind of a slow, almost bluesy part to the guitar at points in the song. It's not dominated by it, but there's parts in the song that definitely have that feel. This also is that one track, I think maybe the most progressive song on the album. It definitely feels like it could fit onto that first album fairly easily. The vocals, again, more subdued, maybe a little bit too tame. Guitars pick up and are catchier as the song goes along, and the keyboard solo is pretty intense on this song as well. So all of these things add to that progressive kind of feel to this particular track. Easily, I think to me, it's the song that sounds the most like it could belong on that first album. The next track up, Look Into the Night, and that first track that I just said now, that was on the second side. So in that day when they had A and B sides, that would have been the first track on the second side. The second track on that side is Look Into the Night. It's kind of almost when I was listening to it at the beginning, I said, wow, this feels very familiar, and then it just came to me. It kind of has that Freebirds sound to it. I don't know if it sounds like Freebird or it just is in that same kind of setting, that same kind of familiarity, that same kind of feeling. All those things it makes me remember that song. Freebird was the first thing that popped into my mind, which was, as for those of you who know, was a Skynyrd song. The guitar solo, intense, very strong, very heavy intensity for this particular track. Keyboards give a kind of a support to that overall sound. They're not dominating, but they support that kind of feeling that I talked about a little bit with the Freebird. It's overall, I find it a melodic. The second solo, which is a little bit more intense, and the vocals are a little bit more potent at that point as well. But overall, I find this to be a bit of a subdued track, but definitely well within that Freebird sound. Midnight Dreamer, which is the 7th track on the album. It's got an intense, upbeat, fast-paced, poppy song. This one's very different than most of the other tracks on the album. The vocals, again, not that great, a little bit tame, maybe a little bit more indiscriminate, like it's not really memorable if you know what I'm saying. The basses and the drums are both kind of subdued here. The keyboards, maybe a little bit more jazzy-like, I think. And the instrumentation, probably the strongest on this album, but not super strong. To me, the thing I enjoyed the most on the first album was the drums, because Ainsley Dunsbar was all over the place on them. He's a little bit more reeled in here and not as noticeable, not as dominating, same as the guitar player, just not as dominating as they were on that first album. The last track, I'm Going to Leave You, got a nice kind of strong keyboard dominated opening, and then you go to this kind of progressive kind of Hammond organ sound in there as well. Very American sounding progressive rock here, I think. Vocals are probably the most far back of any of the tracks on the album, I think. It's not nearly as dominant, even for some of the weaker tracks on here where the vocals are kind of tame. This is even further back than that. Probably the most proggy song on the album, I think. The keys, the bass, the drums, the guitars all jamming very strongly, making the best instrumentation on the album overall, probably. Everybody's kind of cutting loose a little bit here, I think. Something that you see a lot of in jazz music, where they kind of jam, I guess is the word. It's probably the heaviest track on the album, and the guitars on this track are killer. This is the best. This is just cutting loose on this particular track. So overall, I think it's not a bad album. I think overall, I think it's probably a bit better of an album than the first album. If you were to take each track and kind of level them out, I think this one has a higher medium than the first album. First album. The only thing on the first album is they had that one killer song, and then the rest of them were a little bit unmemorable. This one has some overall better sounds to it, and not a bad track. So if you really like that first Journey album, you'll probably still like this one quite a bit as well. I don't mind it. I definitely will give it another try and listen to it somewhere when I have time. And anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Ben's Album Challenge. Ben's Album Challenge will appear now every second week. Next week we're going to start a new mini-series for this slot, and it'll alternate with Ben's Album Challenge. So one week you'll get the Ben's Album Challenge, and the next week you'll get one of the episodes from the series, which will be a 5-episode series featuring 5 of my favorite drummers. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please hit the like and subscribe. Any comments about the album or anything I've said, you can put those in the comments section down below. And please don't forget to hit the notification bell. And we will see you next week for the first episode of the new mini-series, My Favorite Drummers. And then the following week we will see you for Ben's Album Challenge again. So Take care and have a good day.